When I think about what Julius Chambers and his law firm meant, I think about what it was like to be a poor, black resident of a small North Carolina town, a place where at most you would get cursory help from a white lawyer, if any at all. And I think about what it meant to have Julius Chambers or James Ferguson or Adam Stein or one of these great lawyers come in and represent you, and you were not only getting good representation, you were getting representation from some of the best lawyers that had ever appeared in the courthouses of your town. And what that meant to know that those folks were there to help you and not just to rich people on the other side of the tracks.
Well, it meant a lot to the individual. What did it mean to society? Was it just taking care of one person's problems?
Chambers, in his 30s, appeared at the council's lectern in the Supreme Court, to argue Swan, for example, and to
the busing case,
the big busing case that was decided by the Supreme Court in '71, and his talent and diligence as a lawyer was so widely recognized, even when he was still really quite young, and in the scheme of things, relatively inexperienced as a civil rights attorney compared to some of the folks up in New York at the Legal Defense Fund. But they quickly saw in Chambers, he is our kind of lead force in the courts changing American law in that era after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So absent Chambers, that moment when we pushed our civil rights law as far as it ever went, absent Chambers, that's a very different story.
Nothing else that the NAACP, the Legal Defense Fund, was doing, or any of its lawyers could have done what Chambers did?
Well,
good.
I think that, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that he was working with the Legal Defense Fund.
Absolutely.
I think it was very important to have people on the ground in the South doing what he was doing. There were lawyers all over the South who were connected with the Legal Defense Fund. But what we were told was that none of them had the respect that Chambers and his partners had. That a lawyer in Arkansas would call the Legal Defense Fund for advice, and they'd say, well, call Chambers and his partners in Charlotte. You don't need to come to us. So I think that it's not casting him in opposition to what the LDF was doing. He and his partners were an integral part of the national effort. And it was essential that it come not only from New York, but that it come from the South also.
But none of these outcomes, none of these rulings from the judges and the justices are foreordained. They needed very, very skillful lawyering to present certain kinds of arguments, certain kinds of evidence to shape the view of jurists in this era, so that you would reach maximally advantageous interpretive outcomes by the courts, right? You wanted the courts to say, the law, that statute, the Civil Rights Act, is going to mean this. It's going to mean this much, not something less than that. And so Chambers' talent was to have that vision and to have that capacity to help judges, justices in that era, along with all the folks at the Legal Defense Fund, really think about what should this law mean? How far can we get with our law to begin to adjust what have long been racially, profoundly unjust circumstances in this country, around schools, around jobs.
And it was no surprise when Jack Greenberg retired that the person the Legal Defense Fund chose to become its new director counsel was Julius Chambers.
Well, there's much more to the Chambers story. I'm looking forward to talking to you all about it on North Carolina Book Watch sometime soon. And I think you've driven me to go back and read your book again, because there's so many wonderful, poignant stories that you tell about Chambers and his colleagues and what it's meant to North Carolina.
Thank you.
Thanks, DG.